class, this is Mrs. Smith, and I'm going to show you the different pieces of lab equipment that we'll be using this year. This is the electronic balance that you'll be using. You need to make sure that it's plugged in and you press the on button. When the balance says 0, you always want to use a weighing boat. Don't ever put chemicals directly on the metal tray. So put the weighing boat on there, and then you press the on button again to make it read 0. That way you can measure out just as much chemical as you want, and the digital readout will tell you just what the chemical weighs and not what the weighing boat and the chemical weighs. So it alleviates some of the subtraction that you'll need to do. All right? When you're done using the balance, you just hold down the on button until it says off, and then you can unplug it and put it away. The next thing you'll need to know is a ring stand, and this is different from the picture that I gave you on your handout, but this is the one that you'll use in the lab. You just put it in the hole on the table, all right? And that's going to hold up different pieces of equipment like the iron ring. So I'm going to attach that for now, and we're going to add more pieces as we go along. This is the burette, and the burette is like a very accurate graduated cylinder. It's going to help you measure volume, and most times it's going to be full already, and you'll need to measure at the bottom of the meniscus, just like you were taught to read a graduated cylinder. Then you're going to use this piece at the bottom to dispense some of the liquid. The valve is closed when it's perpendicular and open when it's parallel to the burette. So right now liquid would be pouring out of here, but if I turned it 90 degrees, that would hold the liquid inside, all right? You're very familiar with a graduated cylinder. Now let me tell you about this piece at the top right here. This piece at the top does not help you measure out your liquid. You want this piece to stay at the top because if someone bumps it and knocks it over, that piece of plastic actually keeps the glass from breaking. If I held this plastic piece down here and I tipped it over, then the top of my cylinder would chip. So please just keep this part at the top. It's called a graduated cylinder because that looks like a little graduation cap at the top. The next piece of equipment on your sheet is the funnel, and the funnel is going to help you either to fill your burette with whatever solution you need to put in there, or sometimes it's used for filtration. So we're going to put it right here in the iron ring and set up a little filtration for you. If you needed to filter a solid out of your solution, maybe you have a mixture of sand and water, you would need to use this piece called a filter paper. And to fold it properly, you fold it in half twice. But then when you open it up, you hold one piece on one side and 3 pieces on the other side. And when you stick it in the funnel and get it wet, it will stick to the glass and you won't have to worry about holding it open like I have to do right now. All right? So that's the filter paper. That's something else that's not on your sheet. You may want to write it down next to there, filter paper. The burette clamp is the piece of equipment that's going to hold your burette to this ring stand so that you can actually put liquid in it, because laying down right here is not going to be very good for holding liquids. So the burette clamp works like this. You put the ring stand through the middle, and then to attach your burette, you just squeeze the 2 end pieces together, and then put it in the little grooves right like that. So now it's very steady and stable in there, and you would be able to fill it from here. The well plate is just what it sounds like. It's used for holding small amounts of liquid chemicals. A lot of times we'll be mixing drops of chemicals. You mix 5 drops of one chemical with 5 drops of another chemical. So this is useful for holding your chemicals. And the lid only goes on one way. So if I flipped it around and I tried to put it on, it actually will not go down this other way. So it only fits on one way so you don't get lost. It's important to mark where you're going to put certain chemicals before you put the chemicals in there. You always need to do that. If you're going to be using a flask to hold liquids, you always want to label the flask, and the marking pencil is good for doing that. All right? This is a wax-based pencil. To get it off of the glass, you just simply use a dry paper towel. All right? A wet paper towel will not work to get this off. The flask is going to be used to hold solutions and sometimes to make solutions. So if I wanted to dissolve some of this baking soda in water, I would put the proper amount of baking soda in with the proper amount of water and then just swirl it around like this. If I wanted to store the baking soda water for any period of time, I would need to use a rubber stopper, the proper size, and that would work on top of there. Or if I didn't want to use a stopper, or if I ran out of stoppers, I could use this thing. This is called parafilm. Stretch it out a little bit, put it over the lid, and then just let it go. And it seals it up pretty well. So parafilm is another thing that you can use, and it's mentioned on your sheet. A beaker is used to hold liquids, not to measure them, all right? Because this right here says approximate volume. You always want to use a graduated cylinder when you're measuring volume. The beakers are just for approximation. Beaker and flask, please get them right. Do not confuse the two. The crucible, as shown in your diagram, the crucible sits on the iron ring in the clay triangle. So I'm going to set that up quickly right here to show you what that's going to look like. And the crucible is going to be used to heat small amounts of chemical for a long period of time over the burner. So that's what this setup would look like, okay? The clay triangle holds the crucible on the iron ring, and that's how that setup would look, and then the Bunsen burner would go underneath here. I'll teach you how to light the Bunsen burner when you come to lab in person. The evaporating dish is another piece of equipment that we can use. Sometimes we'll make solutions or do some chemical reactions that make water, and we want to drive the water off and collect the salt or whatever else we made in the chemical reaction. So to use the evaporating dish, we're going to use that with the wire gauze and the watch glass. Okay, so the watch glass goes so that the curved part goes on the top, and so it will curve down into the dish a little bit. All right, and that's what this setup would look like with the evaporating dish. Another piece of equipment that we can put on the ring stand, and I'm going to move it over here to this hole so I can be a little closer. If we wanted to heat a test tube for a long period of time over the burner, we would want to use this test tube clamp right here. So the test tube clamp works like this. It has another little wing nut that you would tighten, and you always want to make sure that you tighten it over the top of the test tube and not near the bottom of the test tube, because the flame could actually melt this plastic on there, and that wouldn't be very useful for us. When you're heating the test tube, you want to make sure that you tilt it slightly and that it's pointed away from your other group members. So we're going to point it here toward the center in case anything pops out of there when it gets dry. That way we don't have any hot chemicals popping out on people. The tongs are useful for moving the crucible around, and there's a couple different ways that you can use them. You can use them as a grabber, or you can flip them over and make a little cradle for your crucible. And you'll practice this when you get to lab and get to play around with the different tools. The hot gripper is good for picking up beakers, especially if you use them on the hot plate. Okay, so if it's hot, remember that it looks the same as cool glassware, so we want to make sure that we are using the proper tools for hot items. The forceps are used to pick up small pieces of chemicals. You'll be working with magnesium, which is not safe to touch with your hands. You must make sure that you use the forceps to pick up your samples of aluminum. The mortar and pestle are good for grinding up chemicals into a powder. A thermometer you're very familiar with. Make sure that you put the liquid, or you put the thermometer all the way into the substance, and when you read it to the nearest tenths place. Okay, so you want to estimate a tenth on your reading. The hot plate is another piece of equipment that will need to be plugged in, and there is an easy to read dial here. You just turn it to the desired setting, and be careful not to burn yourself on it. Test tube holder is going to be used to hold test tubes or pick them up when they're hot. Make sure that you're not squeezing this part when you're holding it, otherwise it's going to fall right out of there and break. Alright, so once you squeeze it and put it around the test tube, then you want to hold it toward the back the way I'm doing right now. An important tool for cleanup is the test tube brush. You stick it inside the test tube. Usually when it's wet, it's easier to turn and to get out any crusty items that might be in there. Okay, so you have to clean your test tubes and do a good job of it. This dropper is called a micro pipette, and that's what you'll use to dispense drops. We don't call it a dropper, it's a micro pipette. And then this one that's made of glass, and it has different markings on it, like a graduated cylinder would. It's used to measure volume. This one's a 10 milliliter variety, and we use it with the pipetter. All right, I'll show you how to use the pipetter when you come to lab, but we're going to use this wheel up here, and this button here to do that. We'll play with that more when you come to lab. Goggles are very important for reminding you not to touch your eyes during chemistry labs. Chemical splash apron. This is another piece of equipment that you'll put on when you first come to lab. Ties in the back. If you use a bow, it's easier to get off. Gloves will only be used a few times throughout the year. I will let you know when you'll need to wear them. The wash bottle is a good tool to use for cleaning up test tubes. And the wash bottle has this unique feature where it can squirt uphill. So you can get any residue out of there. One piece of equipment that I did forget to put on your sheet is called a Petri dish. And a Petri dish is used to hold samples of chemical, just to look at them, or possibly for a reaction with water. So you're going to use a Petri dish this year also. So that concludes your lesson on the different pieces of equipment and how to use them, and we'll practice all these skills when you come to class.